Hello and welcome everybody to this online event hosted by Sirius Arts Centre in Cove, County Cork, Ireland. My name is Aileen Quirk. I work as Programme and Operations Manager at Sirius. The title of this event is Talk to the Land, the practice of commoning and real montage in the work of Partisan Social Club. We are joined today by Partisan Social Club members Mel Jordan and Andy Hewitt in conversation with Professor Christa-Maria Lerm Hayes, who we know as Mia. Partisan Social Club is an evolving provisional collective that assembles members through projects related to histories, theories and practices of commoning and makes language-based works through participatory processes. Their exhibition, Talk to the Land, was presented at Sirius in 2022. Talk to the Land explores three aspects of commoning inspired by the thinking of 18th century Irish Cork-based philosopher William Thomson. Thomson's ideas examined landlordism, how to practice a culture-led reclaiming of cities and utopian settlements. This event will see the premiere of Partisan Social Club's new film, Collective Nouns II, commissioned by Sirius. The film showcases a new group of collective nouns created and performed by friends and colleagues they encountered during their residency at Sirius in 2022. Partisan Social Club uses collective nouns, playing on the idiosyncratic way English refers to groups of animals, to produce political statements. As contributors speak their collective noun to the camera, they echo calls for action by protesters in the political arena. Joining us in conversation with Mel and Andy is Christa-Maria Lerm Hayes. Mia is an art historian, writer and curator, currently working as a professor of modern and contemporary art history at the University of Amsterdam. Mia is the curator of the exhibition Reading Time, currently on show at Sirius. Reading Time features artwork by Brian O'Doherty, also known as Patrick Ireland. These works are layered in time and space and concern the building that Sirius occupies, Irish history and literature as a medium that unfolds durationally. The exhibition is the first presentation of O'Doherty's practice since his passing on the 7th of November 2022 and reiterates his key themes: self, language, perception and ideology. What has brought us all together is the EU-funded SpaceX programme, which stands for Spatial Practices in Art and Architecture for Empathetic Exchange, This is a transdisciplinary research action that utilises secondments between academic institutions and third sector organisations in order to scope and map European spatial practices. What a better moment then to have the artists in conversation with Mia, who has such insight and understanding of the Irish political landscape and the Sirius building itself. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Mel and Andy to introduce themselves and their work. And yeah, you're all very welcome.
Thank you very much, Aileen.
Thank you very much, Aileen.
Thank you. So am I going to share the screen?
Yes,
now?
what we have is some images on a ubiquitous PowerPoint presentation. And it's going to be intersected with some short films as well.
Oops. How do you do it? Get it wrong. Okay, that was a quick flick.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Great. Okay, let's kick off. Thanks, Aileen, again for the introduction. And just by means of a little bit more detailed introduction, forgive us while we just maybe set the scene a little bit more about who we are and what the practice is concerned with. Yeah, we're very privileged to have a little bit of space to do that. So great for the invitation to come and speak about the project now we've done it with you. Certainly the we are the Partisan Social Club, myself and Mel, and we do work with other people along the way, and that's what we certainly did at Sirius Art Space. Before we were the Partisan Social Club, we operated as a free art collective with Dave Beach. and for many, many years. There's some images here which locate us within that time span of practice as well. But just to say a few things about what we do and to frame our practice, our inquiry is into called the social function of art, or what art is and does in society. And so we're very much interested in sort of the politics of what art is. And we try to align our art practice, its histories and theories, with public sphere theory, which some of you might be very much aware of, which sort of came out of later end of Frankfurt School, and connects critical and social theories together. But we use this to think about what or who is the public, sometimes the public of art, and how things can be made public via cultural works. So that's how, if you like, that's the bigger framing of our practices, certainly over the past 25 years or so, I suppose now. In the practices, we use methods of rewriting, renomination, and rehearsal to make our artworks, some of which you can see here. This is a screenshot from our website. So we use ideas such as rewriting of texts that we find, texts that we're reading. We rewrite slogans, and we produce manifestos, often rewritten manifestos, or manifestos that we admire, we like, but we sometimes adjust. We use objects, props, kiosk structures, and printed matter, so you get a sense of the aesthetic here of practice. And we also often appear in our sort of old way now, but as sort of embodied people with other people, thinking about sort of performative actions where we're doing things in the world. Because central to our thinking is an idea of people publishing to each other, and as we're trying to seek ways of collectively working things out with other people in processes that support opinion formation. We're interested in what you think and against what we think. So sometimes there's an agonism at the heart of what we do. And all this together, we imagine as a sort of process we call real montage, which we hopefully get to speak about as we'll go through the presentation.
So I wanted to just say that Talk to the Land project was developed out of a secondment, as Aideen has already said, that we were able to undertake as part of the EU-funded SpaceX RISE project, and obviously Sirius is part of this network. And we were just talking about how many things have sort of got going from this network. So we're really excited that me as part of the network, University of Amsterdam, and her work is on show at Sirius now. We were there before, so this is, and of course Aideen's speaking from Amsterdam on her secondment. So there's a sort of intertwining of us going backwards and forwards. And as Aideen said, SpaceX stands for Spatial Practices in Art and Architecture for Empathetic Exchange. And it's cross-sectoral, so it's what happens is that it's cultural organizations, universities and art academies, and if you're from a university you go to a cultural organization, and if you're from a cultural organization you go to a university. And we hope we've managed to sort of put this together as a network that has more than one place to visit in the same country or in the same region. So that was our aim. And during our time at Sirius, we made a series of new works for exhibition based on our research on William Thompson, a Cork-born philosopher and thinker. And as Andy said, our interest is in art's political function and collective approaches to production. Yeah, and we're going to talk a bit about production, because we think that that's sort of quite interesting in the way we made things while we're there, and it's also sort of part of our relationship to art making and display. And so we made works while in situation at Sirius, and we displayed them with some existing works, and we're going to talk about that. But this picture is of Sirius Art Centre, and so you can see the front of it there, and at the back you can see its view onto the harbour, which is a very deep harbour, which means that a lot of cruises come into Cove, and so cruise ships come in and out. And obviously it was one of the points where the Titanic stopped, and people got on, unfortunately. And as you can see in the other picture, that is from the top of Cove looking down. So I just thought I'd introduce you to some of, none of us are there now as we're talking about it, but to place us there.
Great. So we've got some documentation of the exhibition to show you, which and what you'll see is a series of 4 artworks, or groups of artworks, I should say, which we made during the residency. So yeah, it's very much about production, and we'll talk our way through those if that's okay with you. But just to add, the residency periods were in April, August, and a bit of September as well. So we were backwards and forwards through the production, but I think a lot of work was produced there. As our 31 days, which we get from the SpaceX project. The first work is a film entitled Talk to the Land, from which we'll show an excerpt shortly. And this is based, as has already been mentioned, on the writing of William Thompson. His dates are 1775 to 1833, and he's a Cork-born philosopher and thinker who was aligned with the cooperative movement of the time, the first cooperative movement of the time, certainly in Southern Ireland. And he wrote a number of books, one in particular, what you see here on the left, which has got a fabulous title, hasn't it? An inquiry into the principles of the distribution of wealth most conducive to human happiness. So really getting his teeth into some economics of the time. But this provided us with a starting material for the film, which you'll see shortly. But just in a little bit of context around what we did and what we did during the residency was this is an image of the township of Cahoogarif, which was some hours drive west of Cork, where Thompson attempted to start a commune on land that he owned. He was very much a middle-class subject of Cork, quite wealthy. But for the first time, we see somebody of that sort of class trying to construct an alternative to that type of economy and introduce other people to working the land with him. Today, there's nothing left of that particular settlement, but we wanted to visit the place to imagine the activities that we had read about through Thompson's books and imagine what happened there. He wrote another book entitled Practical Directions. That was an outline of what community like this should look like and how it can operate. So it was actually a very, very different type of book for Thompson. It's quite practical, and there's all sorts of ideas of growing particular vegetables that fitted the climate in Southern Ireland. And was really some of the experiences he had in the latter years of his life just before he died in this text, after which point this idea fell apart. So there's a sadness to the whole thing. But in our film, we wanted to combine both parts of these books in a text that accompanies this short film. So what we did was we made a banner, which was formed from some of the texts that we'd been, I should say, this is a rewriting process, I suppose. We were drawing from Thompson's text to produce some short slogan works. Part of our engagement with this is to imagine more optimistic histories, I suppose, and to remember that people have continued to resist what we might see as the steering effects of capital and liberal individualism. So this was a process of making a banner which spoke of that. We also wanted, by visiting that space and being on the land, we also want to imagine the land as being an actor within that process, and nature being an actor within it. And you'll see that in the film shortly, when it was a rather windy day, which took us by surprise. I think in Thompson's book, the land tends to be very much a resource, and we know through the critical thinking and theory that we're thinking of today, that we're thinking about land as much more of an actant in our philosophical thinking. We made 2 films during the residency based on footage.
Can I just say, we used all the facilities?
Yeah. We did use all the
facilities. Yes, we did. We dyed this banner in the washing machine, but we did clean it out. So we used all the facilities we could find while we were there. Sorry.
Yes.
That was
yes. Yeah. A little anecdote about was trying to work with what we had
yeah.
and using the local stores to get materials to make things happen. Yeah, so we made 2 films during the residency based on footage of our work on the site and with the rewriting of Thompson. And so you see here Mel on the site of, this is Cahugarif, a former farming building which just fallen into wreck and ruin, which we used as a base to do some of the shots and to do some of the sound works from. Next picture, I think. And this is one of the stills that we produced from the film, which you'll see in a short time. And with the Sirius team, we built and pasted billboard posters of the landscape at Cahugarif onto that structure that you can just see behind our colleagues here. So billboard posters is a way, I suppose, of creating a sort of an image of the site onto which we then montaged the film works. Which so there was, and also the poster which was presented. So the banner that was present in the space opposite the poster. So there was these props that we were using that were parts of the film, but actually became part of the exhibition as well. Here we see a monitor on a view of Cahugarif, and on the next image you'll see, not quite the next image actually, but the image after this, you'll see the other billboard poster, which captures the building from which we were working on site at Cahugarif, again with another short film which you'll see. So what we're going to do now is look at the film, a short clip. So we're going to stop sharing and we're going to find
see, Andy's instructing me how to do it.
Instructing your finger to find our way to the file.
So we go to share again,
yeah,
and then.
And what we won't show you the whole film, we'll just show you a clip of it, just so you get a sense of Cahugarif itself and the action and some of the rewriting that we did. So about a minute and a half of this.
We can't go on being deluded by the common sense of the current system, in which the distribution of wealth is not associated to the labour of each person or objects or materials. The rich become mega rich as they produce. They use their accumulated capital to extort more value, original value created by the labour of others. We know that wealth consists of all those objects of desire which are produced by labour, and labour is that species of exertion, whether of mind or body, which produces any object of desire, which is also of exchangeable value. By community of property or possessions, we do not mean that no human or non-human actor shall possess anything, but that everyone shall possess everything, and everything shall possess everyone. The pleasure of possession should not be lessened by the self-tormenting feelings of antipathy, no rejoicing in the exclusion of others, but rather enhanced by the pleasures of sympathy, with numerous friends deriving similar pleasures from the same objects, and such proprietorship being essential to personal independence. Individual actors will create new collectives, formed of individual actors. To collectivise does not mean to homogenise. Our community will be an association of actors, in sufficient numbers, who will dwell with the land and resources sufficient to supply, by their own exertions, all of each other's wants. Every subject entering a community is willing to direct their labour, mental or physical, or as is most frequently the case, both combined, to the production of means most conducive to the general good. Mutual cooperation for all. To achieve equal distribution for every human or non-human.
I'm going to pause it there, but an excerpt from that particular film, but you can sort of see some of the rewriting that we went on. Well, you might not fully appreciate the how we adjusted the text, but there were certain ways which I guess when we've worked with manifestos and text that we adjust, we modernize some of the ideas, but I think still there's very much sort of 19th century feel to the writing style that you got here, and of course we've got Mel's voice.
Yeah, and sort of it's really cringy to have to listen to it, but anyway, I get over it. And sorry about that, but we were using what we had, the resources that we had. So I'm going to stop sharing that film and then go back to the PowerPoint. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. Sorry. So I'm going to talk about work that we made that is called How to Practice Cultural-Led Recommoning. We first wrote this in 2022, and it's the first iteration of a text that we made into a poster. It was written by us and Gary Hall, and was part of a paper that we wrote called The City Does Not Exist, for the City Public Space and Body Conference, organised by some close colleagues of ours now. And in this work, we were trying to discuss problems that we think exist within the current planning of cities. Things like we could no longer rely on previous incarnations of the city as a blueprint for the new ecologically stable, socially equitable metropolis. We cannot imagine we know who lives in the city, and we cannot preempt who or what they will be. As the new city dwellers do not exist, we have to be prepared to call them forth. In order to provoke the becoming of new subjectivities and the formation of opinion, we cannot rely on tired techniques of inclusion. We have to invent and implement new strategies for participation. We must transform the city into a new and evolving process that accepts multiple assemblies and shifting compositions of life. We must negate the city as it stands. There is no space for reform because the infrastructure already is flawed, and the city may never again exist in the same way. The multiverse is an innovative, repackaged way to engage us with new tech platforms, and this version of the multiverse must be hijacked in favour of a city that doesn't exist, and a version of the multiverse that is based on multiple ways to think about how we can live together. So what we want to do is to build a city, develop, maintain and care for a wide variety of counter organisations and communities that help us to perform our subjectivities and ways of being together along more anti-capitalist, anti-racist and anti-heteropatriarchal lines. I've been practicing saying that, it's a bit difficult. So we had this one text, and then we rewrote that text and to something sort of shorter and with a different feeling. And then we wanted to display the text again in a way that was more physical and embodied. And we were thinking about simple ways to make works while in residence, as we said, using what we had. And we came across this palette covers that you can buy online, and we bought one with us. And Nico found us a palette, this blue palette at the bottom there, and made us a wooden space frame, and we covered it with the palette cover. And we liked the idea of the object as almost a crappy bit of public sculpture or a weak monument that carried a text about the city that you could read as you walk round. And we wrote the text by hand onto the tarp with these wax markers that we found that actually wrote onto tarpaulin. I suppose, and a little bit in a broader sense, to say that our work is usually made from a communicative encounter. So we make decisions based on prompting this type of engagement within the artworks. And of course, language is always interpretable, but we want to use arrangements of materials, images and text to intertwine with ideas of public and private, outside and inside, text and image, material and the body. And so we're interested in using the tradition of specification anyway in our work. So as is in minimalism, and reuse, renomination of objects and spaces, and then rehearse how they might operate together. So our sort of social practice comes from that sort of principle and ethos, and I suppose that the notion of display, and hopefully we might talk a bit more about this with Mia, is really important in terms of this moment that the work comes into sort of being.
Thanks. So we've touched on the two films and the banner, and you've just seen the plinth. So you can sort of see some of the objects that were taking up space in the exhibition gallery at Sirius, and along with that, there were some other works which were again text-based, and here's an instance of some slogan scarves that we included in the exhibition. And we've just a little bit about slogans, because we've been working with ideas of slogans for some time now. Slogans are ideas of sort of carrying politicized ideas just through a few words. We see them as sort of triggers for debate in the practice. We see them as a sort of beginning of conversation, really, with people. Slogans are often sort of maligned because they might be seen as sort of quite pithy, short statements about quite complicated matters. But for us, they are a really important part of the history of politics and protest, because they are these beginnings of a conversation, or they are a demand for action, or they are sometimes actually quite partisan thoughts which need to be said in culture. So we like them a lot, as you can tell. We wanted to make slogans that you can embody and display your opinion through. So wear them, basically. So I mean, there's a history of the T-shirt, which we've made. These are scarves. We make badges too, but carrying these ideas, and often getting other people to come up with the ideas alongside of ours, or in response to ours. I suppose a football scarf, which these were based on, these were manufactured by a company that usually makes football scarves, but you go into the software and you can design whatever you want. But the football scarf, we like the language of these because it sort of brings this idea of partisan groups and antagonism that is a part of the game of football and the everyday culture that is. That's very much a live part of many people's activities and leisure, and often it's about sort of cultural activity which is based on where you're from and strong allegiances, I suppose. So we use this particular form within this project. What you're looking at here is 4 scarves from a project we did quite a few years ago when we first, well, not actually, maybe not the first time we met Miguel, who's not with us today, unfortunately, but he curated an exhibition called Housing Question in 2017 at MIMA in Middlesbrough. And these were 4 scarves that we produced for that particular project, where they were displayed and people were encouraged to wear them, and we then take a photograph of them being worn, and so there was this engagement with these objects that were there, and people were sort of choosing the ones that they liked, and there was quite an energy around that. So they were presented in the space alongside these slogan scarves, which, as you say, make all capitalist labourers, which actually is a reference to Thompson again, and adapted Thompson from an inquiry into the principles of the distribution of wealth most conducive to human happiness. You
just like saying that.
Yeah. Get breathless with his book titles.
Yeah.
That this particular design is really quite graphic. Again, it's checkered. It was a project for Coventry Biennale a couple of years ago now, reflecting Coventry's home of the Two-Tone Records label in the late 1970s, early 80s. I'm sure you might remember the groups like the Specials, the Beat, and the Selector, people like that. And
that's when we first sort of discovered Thompson, because Coventry is twinned with Cork, and we started sort of looking across our two cities.
That was when we first met Thompson. Yes, yeah. That's right. So they're presented. Here's Aideen, actually, with sorry about this, Aideen, popped you in as image in here, but this is back into the space just prior to the exhibition being completed. Actually, that's one of the boards that was going to take a billboard poster, but what we were looking for through the use of these pieces of paper, which are sort of templates for people to write on, is people to design their own scarves in response to ours. And so here was a workshop which brilliantly Aideen pulled together with some local volunteers. And we started this process. And on image on the right, you can sort of see people's initial responses to this, which then became part of the exhibition space here on these washing lines, which we strung across the space. I'm not sure how much Miguel liked those in the end, but
well, yeah, he let us do it.
Hanging out our washing in the exhibition space we were, weren't we?
Yeah, so you can see there was this idea that if people were going to make them, we should just put them up and have them there. So
definitely. What's that? Start riots, not diets. I remember that one. Very nice.
So I'm just going to talk about, I think this is our last little bit, so we're nearly done, about these collective noun works, and you can see us in the space, and we brought these posters and then we were sort of making them. You can see me drawing on the left hand side, and these are part of our collective noun works. So we're thinking about slogans as language, and then sort of the changing of collected nouns and seeing what we can do with that with language as well. So this includes posters written by ourselves and others, and short video works produced by people using their cell phones for recording, responding to our request to create new collective nouns. And I think Aideen's already said, but a collective noun is a collection of things taken as a whole. Collective nouns are associated with animal groups and are sometimes used to describe a job or a profession, for example, a memory of elephants or a hastiness of cooks. And in this work on the left there, which we've called We're Not Alone, we invented new collective nouns for people that will be most valuable to us all in a new world order. And We Are Not Alone was about celebrating those that act for the collective good and presents those that help others as most valuable to society. And this came out of the pandemic. People that suddenly there was a celebration of people that did things that were usually anonymous or undersold, and so we wanted to sort of celebrate this. And then we made these works that were posters. They were window posters as well, so that people were using their windows a lot at that time, and so you could colour them in and put them in your window. And these posters were firstly produced for Haroon Faruqi Institute and the Journal of Visual Culture, who did a project about the pandemic. And as well as COVID-19 specific collective nouns we made during the pandemic, we've been working on new collective nouns for groupings of people who resist the dominant political regime. So negative titling and naming can deride a political cause and is used quite a lot in the rhetoric of politics, of course. So we've allocated collective nouns to political publics to communicate positive attributes. And so you can see there on the left-hand side, we made some new collective nouns that were reflections on common in. And we had a space in which we asked people to write their own collective nouns in the gallery and paste them. So by rethinking the collective names in which we refer to the politically active individuals among us, we can convert their resistance into positive citizenship, reminding us that the victories of protest are incorporated into our everyday lives. Votes for women, the right to roam, better working conditions, the results of people standing up for the collective good. In the exhibition, we showed a previous film, Collective Nouns for Political Publics, but during the secondment, as Aideen said, we asked people we met and friends of ours and colleagues to produce new collective nouns to be included as part of a new film. And we wanted to take this opportunity to thank everybody for doing that. And we wanted to launch the finished work here today. So we'll do that in a minute. And the work is called Collective Nouns, Reflections on Commoning. And I just wanted to say thank you again to Eve Olney, and this is us in conversation at the gallery. Eve's from the Living Commons, and she led in conversation with us while we were at Sirius. And another thing we did while we were there was we wrote an article about, we were very interested in notions of depoliticisation. And so we wrote an article called Depoliticisation, Participation in Social Art Practice on the Function of Social Art Practice for Politicisation. I just wanted to get that in there as well, because I wanted to sort of collect all the things that we did while we were at Sirius. So we're going to show the new film now. So do I stop sharing?
You do, yeah.
Okay, I can hear Gary cringing at me for this.
I think it's seamless so
Seamless.
far. Seamless.
Where is it though? Where is it now?
That's a good question.
It's not there, is it?
Mm-mm.
You had to say it was seamless, didn't you?
And I've
You
thrown a spanner in
ruined
the
it.
works now.
Oh, sorry.
We had it open early, didn't we?
We have got it open. Hang on. Sorry, everybody. So what about if we escape that? Where is it gone?
There. So, brilliant. Well done.
But it's not on that share thing now. Is that working?
Aideen, can you see that?
Can you see that?
Yes, I can see that.
Fantastic.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
A heat stroke of polluters, a swell of empaths, a cornucopia of horticulturalists, a cauldron of swimmers,
a cultivation of allotmenteers,
a cul-de-sac of property developers, a pass it on of open source publishers,
Oh, that's lovely.
A cabaret of politicians,
a drift of sailmakers,
A gamut of Gaelgory. A glare of disapproving ants. A nightmare of omnipotent narcissists. A vomit of grant application forms.
A horn of altar boys.
A bleed of speculators.
A plot of neo-urbanists.
Everyday wig now.
A loneliness of beta males.
A pile of Lego designers.
A vulgarity of social media influencers.
A euphony of economic migrants.
A truancy of empaths. An hypocrisy of corporate culture care speak.
An amalgamation
of digital nomads.
We done? Yep. Thank you. We've done our bit now. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you for
much.
listening.
Yes, wonderful. Thanks so much. I learned much more about your work. I did see the exhibition at the time when I visited recently in order to prepare the current exhibition. So what strikes me is that there are so many different ways of engaging with social practice, with space and art and academia. So maybe I could start with a question about how you see the connections between your academic work and your artwork and your citizenship, I suppose, and the kind of social practice that manifests in such an exhibition.
Sorry, I'm just writing that down just to get it. Thank you. No, thanks for that. No, that yeah, it's interesting to think about the academic work, because obviously as practitioners that are academics and that think about practice research as well, it's sort of like always on our minds. And I think that the relationship between our practice, I suppose I've been thinking more and more about the way in which we probably make practice in a sort of humanities way, in that we sort of we try out ideas, and then from reading things, and I'm sure this is how lots of people make practice, but and then we sort of test them out and work them through, and there's sort of, for us, the practice is it is practical in the sense that we're trying to put together sort of objects, text, the world, and we're working out those things by trying them out, and then at the same time, through doing that, having some insights about, like we said, we wrote a journal article on depoliticization, so it's sort of so there's something about being in the practical and being part of the part of making art and making exhibitions that probably informs very much our responsibility to art's social function as well. So I think there's something there about how we might put the two things together, and I suppose being teachers as well. I've been teachers for a long time, so and how that sort of impacts upon what you might make and do, especially within the context of fine art, where social practice is slightly it doesn't come out of the sort of the beaux arts of painting, sculpture and printmaking, say. It comes, if you like, it does sort of come out of a sort of 1960s sort of, you know, we could argue this.
Conceptual art, and you mentioned minimalism and so on. That's clear enough. It does feel a little bit, if I may say, that now I and we, the team that realized my exhibition, and the SpaceX consortium that has met in Dublin not too long ago, that we're kind of extensions of all of this. I mean, I feel honored to actually feel like that. It becomes a collective exercise, I suppose, bringing new experiences, other kinds of things serendipitously together in a way. So maybe if I can kind of jump off from that serendipity, having worked in that same Eastern Gallery of the Sirius now, having sort of lived there for a little while, installation period, looking out onto the town, of course, onto the sea as well, and seeing all of those kinds of issues, things, people come together. Has that brought other things? Because you already were then aware of Thompson, you brought that Corkonian into the mix, but what was it like for you to look out those same windows and see the playground there first in the foreground, and then also the park with the bandstand, the tour boats, the ferry to the military harbor, industrial site, former incarceration complex and things like that. The tourist side, the pollution of the water, all of those kinds of things do come together somehow, don't they?
They do indeed, and yeah, we were talking about this earlier about this about the return to traveling that we have experienced post COVID, and I think there's a sort of ethics now of not travel and of doing things online like we are today, and that's brilliant. I think we've all become very fluent, even this presentation was fluent in terms of presenting ourselves in a way which is fantastic, isn't it? The fact that we are able to meet up so readily now. So yeah, there was a question for us about being in Ireland, I mean, particularly as Brits, as English people, and then exploring ideas of Irish citizens and land use, because we know land is such a politicized idea within the Irish context, and to this day, I mean, in terms of an economy around private ownership, and which is sort of seizing up probably ideas of social mobility in Ireland now. So I'm saying all that, but I think there's something still valuable about us traveling and engaging in other people's context, political context, even if we might be a little bit naive to some of the details and specific issues that are around us. But we were very privileged because, well, when we were there, we learned so much from the people that we met. And I think that's from the people that Aidan introduced us to, but also some of the people we were working with in the gallery space, about the particularities of Cove and Cork and the Irish situation. That I think that certainly influenced our practice.
The plinth, we didn't really know much about what was happening in the harbour, of the regeneration of the Cork harbour, and the plinth that we made was like our bodgy attempt to sort of think about this in a three-dimensional way, generate quite a few conversations for us about the tower that was being planned, or it still is,
redevelopment of the harbour
in Cork. And they were planning on a huge tower on the edge of, everyone's going to can please correct me here because I'll get the details wrong, on the edge of the harbour, where the land was so weak that they would have to pour loads of concrete in to sort of support this new tower of new resident flats.
Classic form of waterfront development for particular investors. It's a certain model that's been rerun. And people liken the plinth to that idea of this sort of tower structure, which was a connection that we hadn't made. But I mean, we were certainly thinking about city planning for that particular work, contemporary problematics around that.
Yeah, then a comparability sort of arises between different places that you had analyzed before, things that you were familiar with, things that the locals are familiar with, or I might be, and how social practice has engaged with this and social practice maybe that might not have called itself that. I mean, Thompson appears in the 19th century as somebody who would fit into that sort of a genealogy, and the previous summer school convener, Greg Cholette, who you mentioned, is somebody who also fits into this thing, but the current artist on show, Brian O'Doherty, in the middle does too. When I had edited a book on Brian's work and presented it, launched it with him in New York in 2018, Greg came with his students of the social practice MFA at Queen's College, New York City University. And it was new to him that the previous generation of immigrants to New York, as in Brian O'Doherty, who set off in Cove in 1957, had already had this sort of a systemic or holistic social practice, intervention, or art as a form or a platform for interventions as one of the sort of driving forces for his work. And when you said that I should come and ask you questions, you said, oh, Brian O'Doherty, yes, his Inside the White Cube is really, really important for us, you said. And Inside the White Cube is that sort of seminal book that first kind of brought an institutionally critical perspective to the gallery space as such, as a white cube, not seeing it as neutral, as the sort of space in which one needs to show art, or one takes for granted. And what appeared in your talk now and in the exhibition for me is that the coloring, especially of the football scarves, echoes Brian O'Doherty's wall painting on the white MDF sheets in the Central Gallery. So we have a little dialogue going on here. Maybe we could explore the layers of that a little bit, because the football scarves and clearly Brian O'Doherty's very colorful wall painting.
Yeah. And not easel painting. It is
exactly.
It is a mural. It is an installed work, which
exactly
is there to this day. Yeah.
And
yes,
that echoes the colorful appearance of Cove itself. It's very colorful doors and houses and boats and so on. These are colors of, you know, normal people painting their fishing boats and things like that. Yes. A kind of an antidote to the white classicist building of the Yacht Club. Yeah. So I'm interested in that sort of triangle or whatever shape it might be, because I hadn't, before seeing your exhibition, really thought of the Yacht Club as a sporting club, as a venue for certain privileged people carrying out their leisure time. And of course, sport is you know, football and yachting do fit into the same government department, well, right, as art. So if you have these sporting scarves that sometimes just seemed to me like merchandise of football clubs where the players are traded for millions, and then these clubs make even more money. So it didn't have, to me, that much connection with sort of grassroots football as such, but you're returning that notion to me in a way, through these slogans that are, you know, an indigenous kind of a concern, indigenous aesthetics, if you will. So when we discussed our little talk in advance, I said, well, now you've been proven right in a way recently through political events with Gary Lineker in the UK, kind of raising certainly my estimation of football as a meeting ground for partisanship in your vocabulary. as a space where you can express that kind of solidarity with migrants, certain leftist politics, and then where solidarity is also expressed in the mediatization of football, in this case, Gary Lineker's BBC.
So, I'm just thinking about issues around race and taking the knee. That was across a lot of sports, but certainly from a British perspective, it was actually, where's it gone? Are people still taking the knee? I don't see it happening. Maybe it's disappeared this season.
We've directed our attention onto Lineker. Yeah. Well, I think there was something about the football match as well as a sort of moment of a sort of different type of public sphere in a way. You know, we usually understand the Habermasian public sphere as a sort of formal place in which we exchange opinions and we have these ideal speech moments, but then the football match is somewhere where we do all that, and we might do it through sounds and chants and our bodies and where we sit. And so I think we were trying to sort of think about the ways in which you could have a different type of public sphere, a less sort of liberal public sphere in a way, but how else can you bring in expressions of politics through, rather than sort of this careful rhetoric of your politics. So that was one of the things we were thinking about too.
Yeah, very nice. The making do with the local. I mean, the local in this case would be more Irish football or hurling or something rather than soccer, I suppose, just to put that right. And where we can also problematize sort of sloganeering through the English language as a kind of a normative thing, but let me put that to one side there for a minute. The local, making do with what you have, with who you have. A wonderful team, of course, at Sirius, you mentioned and showed images of some of the staff members and so on. The materiality of your exhibition was rather sort of low-key in terms of the preciousness of artworks as far as they go, right? So it's not a practice that is made for the market as such. I liked how you described the sort of the palette cover and things like that. So yeah, the monitors also echo what people might have in their homes, sort of things that are quite familiar in that sense, and reproducible technologies with sort of a photo wallpaper and things like that. And particularly the washing line, I liked a lot as well. Now, maybe Miguel might not have approved aesthetics so much, but again, you're vindicated because now there are washing lines in the gallery space again, with Doherty's rope drawing spanning the space and making the viewers again feel part of that environment. It's a very difficult sort of atmosphere, I suppose, in the space, and yet there are so many things that we can link, connect with washing line or in real space. Just like currently, I did go with two of the staff members, Leah and Hannah, or Helen, sorry. I went trespassing into the harbor terrain down by the dock. And we tied this kind of rope to where the ferries land, and to one of the lovely Grecian columns from the the building. And it sort of spans there the art space, or connects it very literally, that space with the harbor. So that washing line maybe provided.
We were thinking back to Doherty and his book, the reference to Duchamp's Mile of String as well.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a classic sort of like perception thing that Duchamp would do. And so you look at, so the gallery is the display, the string is a mile of string on the ceiling. No, not on the ceiling, it's the sax hole on the ceiling. It's across the room. So so that sort of.
That's lovely, because the Duchamp portrait, Brian O'Doherty was friends with Duchamp and took an ECG because he was a medical doctor, and you just use the word perception. And also what tied your work to Brian O'Doherty's medical career. He was trained as a doctor. In my kind of reading of your presentation was, there is no specialist in happiness or something like that.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
No experts on happiness.
Oh, yes, exactly. No experts on happiness. Brian O'Doherty, who was really an expert, who had the scholarship to go to the States from Cove, as I said, in order to research human perception, came out and really impressed on me, I suppose, this notion that as far as art is concerned, and every individual's perception of their environment and in the world and so on, there is no one right perspective. There are no experts on how you have to read a work of art and how you have to engage with your social situation and so on. So I think Brian O'Doherty used very different means. For example, not sloganeering, but sort of more human perception related things, grades of different, wavy lines or something like that, more kind of visual art, drawing and print methods. But
thinking about his renaming, his renomination of his name as well. That was
that was a very powerful political gesture indeed, and one work relating to that name change from 1972 is in the space. And 1972 was when the British Army killed 13 protesters in the civil rights march in Derry in the northwest of the island of Ireland. And he was so shocked as an Irish immigrant that he felt that an activist gesture was necessary. But your work is a lot more direct, whereas his response, however, biting political criticism, it's more indirect in the sense of giving himself the stereotypical Irish name, Paddy Ireland, and sort of reinforcing that so that people would not reinforce the stereotype and would see him and other Irish people, Catholics, Republicans, and so on, as human beings instead. I think that is it's nice. So the diversity of political or activist art strategies really comes to the fore here, I think. Maybe you could say more about that.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think there is sort of within social practice, it's sort of how different strategies and tactics to operate, and we know with even versions of participation, we've been very interested in ideas of opinion formation through working with others, and maybe that's a little bit different from ideas of co-creation or making things together. So one of the things that we do with the slogans is to sort of state our position, and hopefully we think that people say, well, I don't agree with that, and then you can sort of have a conversation, well, what do you think? And then you can move forward. Sometimes when you're posed with a question, then you don't really, you think there's an answer or you're not really sure, but the slogans for us in terms of participation and ideas of discussing opinions and values with others act as a sort of starting point in which they can be agreed with or disagreed with. So as we put them forward, we're not suggesting that they're right. We think about them as contingent, temporary, but we're hoping that they're a sort of trigger, as Andy said, for debate. But I mean, that's just one way, because there's other strategies we see within artists that are interested in social practices, from very direct working with others to institutional and infrastructural opening up and revealing some of the things that might be hidden in a usual in the way that they're usually sort of published to us. So
I think there's a often used term within social practice is, on one side of it, there's agonism. I think we've been always careful about how we work within institutional settings, where sometimes social practices can be presented as a sort of solution to community building.
Exactly, and they can be commodified in turn, right?
Yeah, and so
artists are asked for a few peanuts, you know, to solve the problem of, I don't know what, homelessness or something like that.
That's right. So we've always tread a line which comes from a sense of connection to ideas about social division and cultural division, which comes from our sort of cultural backgrounds, I suppose, as being fairly, you know, working class backgrounds in a British context, and coming through, back to our academia, I suppose, coming through colleges and universities, where sometimes there's an idea of cultural capital gained through being in the arts as for oneself. I think as and when we're working with Dave, we was always quite critical and resistant to that idea of sort of bourgeois culture and what it can do for you. But we were surrounded by it and grew a position against it. And I think the practice has always been trying to maintain that.
Or wrangle with it, or sort of, you know, if you are a social practitioner, how do you address the fact that you're working within this very sort of elite domain, and what do you do with that?
How do you work with a neoliberal institution of a university now, which is increasingly more difficult to develop courses which ask questions, I think.
But it's very visible in your in your Sirius exhibition, right? That sort of classicist Grecian temple-like building that you're kind of taking down a couple of pegs, quite literally, on the ladder, and making the people from the playground see more, in a way, in and out, back and forth from the window, what they might recognize as theirs. So that montage, I think, that you're not just representing something or making something to admire or this or that, but it's an exhibition that does something, and not only through, you know, a few children thinking of another scarf design, or a colleague thinking of another clutch of this and that. You know, for the collective nouns, it's a real montage that in negotiating the show, in establishing the network that you're then using to exhibit, and with the visitors to the exhibition, ideally that you're making something happen in real life. Because if somebody is reading Thompson then for the first time, and they happen to be a member of a housing group, or some activist or student group or something like that, it's real ammunition for them. It can be part of their arguing for more space, or for, you know, their rights in the here and now.
Yeah, I think the thing to say about Thompson as well is that he really is an important thinker and philosopher, because he sort of breaks with the English cooperative movement, and is, quite frankly, much more radical, and accuses them brilliantly. I mean, he's a great orator as well, and he's back and forth from Cork to London and being part of this gang in the beginning, and then sort of overtakes them really with his ideas. And there's some arguments that are noted. It doesn't tell you what happened, but that where he just sort of he wins over. He's a brilliant speaker, but in a sense he's sort of much more radical than the English, and because he doesn't want reform, their version of cooperatism he accuses them of is in a sense a way to keep down the uprising, to keep us happy, in order to carry on some sort of status quo, to give in a bit so that so it is out of liberalism, whereas Thompson is a much more radical thinker and influences Marx. So we must, must love him as a Cork philosopher for that.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And I mean, what the Harbour Cove also stands for is coffin ships bringing half-starved people in 1848, 9, so on. To the States, for example, maybe to Australia as well. So all of that is bound up quite literally to that location. And I did have another question about or wanted to remark actually on how these sort of reform movements and commodifications, the sort of petrifying of social relations and so on, that comes and goes in waves, right? So we have the EU or whatever as an overarching umbrella, and of course, sorry, on the island that you're on right now, frozen, and not to be part of it anymore, probably because of its failings. But it's also brought, many good things to Cork, and has enabled an artist, social practitioner, Joseph Boyce, to visit Cork in 1974 and give a lecture about, trying to shape this sort of new umbrella. At the time, Ireland had joined the EU in 1973, so that was really new and could be thought differently, right? So when all of this petrification happens, and art can be one of those factors, I suppose, to let people think anew, to bring new kind of ways of imagining a future using the past, using, for example, Thompson's or Brian O'Doherty's thoughts, or the kinds of things that Greg Cholette writes about, and bring all of that in quite experimentally in institutions that would be open, like the art sector is, museums and art spaces, to that experimentation. I'm using the word experimental institutionalism to point to Charles Escher, who's also part of our little gathering. What collective noun can we think of now? He's the director of the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven in the Netherlands, and he will lead one of the summer schools, the one after mine, in the summer of 24. So that's a conversation that really the Sirius and Miguel's and Edine's networks through SpaceX enable, so that real work, I suppose, real montage can happen, not just of people or objects that might be exhibited then, but also of discourse. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Was one of the people who curated with Annie Fletcher together the Cork Caucus as part of the EU City of Culture that Cork once was. That's why I went to the EU. Sorry, up my train of thought here. So this sort of long line that you're not just sort of presenting with your exhibition one instantiation of it, but clearly you're providing the vision and the means to for this to extend.
Well, we hope so. We're doing our best, but I mean, it's a year in now, and I think everybody's is using the opportunity that comes with the bits of funding. It's not a lot of funding, but the connections that have been made and the collaborations that are happening. We're really delighted that it's taking off in the way it is, and to see Aideen there with you in Amsterdam, just more evidence of the fact that there's really fantastic collaborations coming out, and we've got some really interesting critical thinkers and activists and artists working on the project.
And I suppose it can't happen without the ground being prepared locally, and that is, for example, through the guest house in Cork, where Aideen is also involved in some of the audience here. And I brought my students to to Cove when Brian O'Doherty's wall painting was uncovered, and we had a wonderful first night of an artistic conversation, a dinner, a convivial gathering in the guest house. That's really where my students from a so-called center, Amsterdam, certainly learned what art can be, that it's not just sort of something that hangs on a nail somewhere, but it's necessary, not just useful in this sort of neoliberal sort of a way of being, good for something, but really vital for networks, for political, social discourse, for people coming together and being with each other, making the place better.
I think that is a really nice point to come in, Mia, and just for the last maybe 10 minutes or so, open it up to the rest of the audience. If anybody would like to ask a question or have any comments, or perhaps people who visited the exhibitions, if they might like to make a comment, you're very welcome. If you don't want to speak yourself on screen, you're also welcome to pop a question or a comment into the chat. I can read it out on your behalf, and I can forward things on to Mia, Mel and Andy. So I'll open it up to the rest of the people there, if that's all right. And I'll jump in with the first question.
Go for it.
While we're waiting, I suppose not really a question.
I'll alter this
for all of you. You were speaking about, you mentioned, Mia, that there's no real expert on happiness, and this is something that I spoke about recently with Hosanna, Miguel's partner. What is happiness, or how can you explain it? And she said, well, I could explain it in scientific terms, where there's neurons firing and there's like a chemical response in your body. That's one way. I suppose another way it could be thought about is in terms of economics, or in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So there are all of these different bodies of research, but they're maybe not so interesting as the way that we speak about it in art. And in terms of my understanding of it, its happiness comes from friendship, and friendship can be found with working together, working collectively. And I think that's something that Mel and Andy, that you've spoken about before, on working together. So I don't know, would you like to talk a little bit about that, especially considering some of the members of the audience here are colleagues of mine, or they're people from the guest house, where I found friendship, and that's inspired my own means of working as well. Maybe you can talk about how you work with friends, or how friendship or happiness can come from the work that you make.
That was a great, really lovely question, and I think. I think we've always looked to collaborate with other people, and our practice has always been, we've had some very long-term collaborations. Dave's not here tonight, but in the past he's been an important friend, and comrade, actually, dare I say, because actually some of the political opinions and ideals that that make us who we are, we've learned from each other, about that through practicing together.
Yeah.
So for us, I think the maybe it comes back to this idea of reading and rewriting, because which is certainly at the heart of our practice, and maybe it connects with Mia's first question about the connection with us and our academic roles, is that I think learning sort of pedagogic processes are at the heart of what we do, and that sounds ever so sort of teachery, but I think there's been we're interested in text, we're interested in learning from each other. There's a sort of search for knowledge, and other people bring that and their opinions about that.
I was thinking about ideas of care as well, and we did a project called On Being Together, where we were trying to think that when you get over the fact that you're going to have to work together and do things, you actually get, and it might seem a bit awkward at first, and especially doing things like workshops with others, and it might just feel a little bit awkward. You get used to it, but if you do that with sort of care and humility, then maybe you find that you've done something, and you get a sort of buzz from doing it together as well, and you just think, oh, we've that sort of makes me happy anyway. I
was just thinking back to because some of us through the SpaceX project, you were there at the Dublin event, and there was moments there where we were thrown into situations where we were doing board games together, where we were doing parkour together, and I think there's something. I think we came away with many new friends through that process, through throwing ourselves into situations where we were unashamedly sort of at a loss for a moment, but and put ourselves at risk through doing some strange things together. So I think we are maybe we try to reproduce that through the practice as well.
There's this idea that you shouldn't do things together. I think there's a sort of forcing ourselves to do it as a discipline, because there is a more of an emphasis on individualism, and through neoliberalism and through liberalism as well, and so to sort of counter that by being together and doing things together seems like an act against that as well. Anyway, sorry, I think we've answered that a lot.
Yeah.
Sorry, but I didn't mean to stop you.
No. I'm just it's such a. I think it's.
Yeah. Oh, George has got a hand up.
Oh yeah, let's take another question.
Yeah.
Say something.
First of all, just to say thank you, Mel and Angie and Mia, for a wonderful presentation and conversation. I think from one of our previous conversations, actually, I think we talked a little bit about this idea of utopia, and I wondered maybe if you could say a bit more about Chomson's utopian settlements, and how does that kind of play or function or operates within your own work with this idea of recommoning the city space. Is there a utopian element, or is there not, I guess?
Yeah, well, I think there's sort of hope and change. I think that when we were talking about recommoning, we were thinking about trying to, again, like get hold of the word commoning from its original roots in terms of its relationship to food and land and so on, and that's how we might sort of see it. And I suppose we were trying to think, what if we said recommoning, what would that help us sort of think about it differently or whatever, and try and think about it as some moment that isn't crisis but is an everyday thing, and so how do you do that, and how do you embody that and do it in an everyday thing? So I think that we're mucking about with writing there in terms of that. And I think there's always this idea that you're sort of critical of things how they are, and if you start to produce what you want, then maybe that's sort of suggested as a utopian moment. But I think I would prefer to sort of think about it as a sort of productive moment of the critical, so that you get that classic thing with new art students where they want to sort of criticize the world as it is by sort of repeating it as it is, and so you end up sort of saying, well, if you think women are represented like this, don't carry on representing them like that. What is it you want, and could you make art about what you wanted? And so I suppose there's sort of something about that. God, we're getting really dark here. Something about that sort of political potential of critique that is interesting to us. And yeah, I think it does seem like utopian, but obviously the histories of utopian and all the sort of the stuff that comes with that, are contested, in some ways problematic. And so I think I would like to sort of more say that productive potential. Don't know if anyone else wants to say. I'm going to turn the light.
Oh yeah, we're going to switch a light on here before we disappear into the gloom of.
I think Mia wants to come in there. Gary also has a question, but he very selflessly said that others can be prioritized because he gets to talk to you a lot. But go on there, Mia.
Yeah, I thought it was nice that Georgia, your question about utopian literature and so on came after the question about friendship, and that these are very connected, of course. And I think as in this SpaceX consortium, we get to know each other in a way, and follow a kind of a social justice agenda, broadly speaking. We realize that being friendly to one another, and maybe even friends with one another, it actually helps put these sort of utopian or maybe slightly derided notions of the perfect world or whatever onto a kind of a more realistic path. And that's also actually what my work with Brian O'Doherty has shown, that Brian actually employed his generosity, his human warmth, as something that was so overwhelming in a way to others that everybody felt, whoever had anything to do with him, that they were the most important person in the world, right? And that they had even their tiniest little role to play and were so necessary for the big thing. So that's one of those sort of connecting elements that I wanted to stress again.
No, it's beautiful. Yeah.
Lovely. Gary, do you want to come in there with your question?
Okay, yeah, I can do that. Hello.
Hey, Gary.
Hi, Gary.
You all right?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Nice to see you.
And you. I'm always fascinated by people's backgrounds. Kids and horns on the wall and things like that. But anyway, I'll try not.
Very baronially,
I know. Okay, so I wanted to just ask you, because you talked about being working class in kind of a middle class bourgeois art environment, education environment, and somebody, don't know why they did, I don't know if you could say, somebody bought me that book yesterday, which is by Cynthia Cruz, and it's called The Melancholia of Class. Wow. I'll just read, we're going to get dark here again, so I'll just read a little bit from the back of the blurb, which is: to be working class in a middle class world is to be a ghost, so excluded, marginalized, and subject to violence. The working class is also deemed by those in power to not exist. We are left with a choice between assimilation into a middle class world, leaving our working class origins behind, or total annihilation. Total annihilation is a bit strong, but kind of talking about how lots of people, lots of the thinkers and artists they're talking about kind of kill themselves, drink or drugs or suicide and stuff like that. So I'm kind of wondering about your experience in that environment, and is that one, because of that kind of marginalization or loneliness or whatever, is that one reason why, another reason why you tend to work together with other people? Is there kind of something?
I think you've got something there, Gary. Yeah. I mean, I think we've maybe felt a certain strength in sometimes when early on, I suppose, with Practice with Free, we were sort of saying some tough things. you know, we're coming out with functions on the function of public art is to increase the
value of private
property on a huge billboard poster put in Sheffield and taken to a conference about public art, which was generally sort of controlled by some quite bourgeois voices. Felt like a really tough thing to do, but because there was, you know, 2-3 of us operating that, you feel quite courageous, and you end up actually sort of doing it for the other person in the collective. And I think to do that sort of work individually, as an individual artist or educator or academic, would be, you know, from a certain class background, would feel just too overwhelming. So I think we have unionized some of our thinking a little, in order to feel strong about sometimes going against the grain with. This is with commissioning processes and working with arts council organisations as well.
As we've got older, it's been easier to say some of those things, but you were really sort of nervous saying some of those things, especially when you use text to say them, because obviously they're not interpretable. They're not, people kind of got that wrong. In the same way as making images. But
I guess we've been going against the grain in lots of different ways. You know, using text art is, you know, heart on the sleeve, that, you know, it comes out of minimalism and conceptualism, and since univocal things upsets many people as well. So we know the tactics we're using, and
I guess I wanted to ask, has it got better? Because on the one hand, we get older and we get a bit more experience, or maybe, I don't know, confident sometimes. On the other hand, the world seems to have gone in the other direction, and it is, I mean, Mel and I were talking about it a little bit, it's only the likes of Gary Lineker who's kind of got enough money and independence that he can kind of say those things and can push back a little bit, whereas it's harder and harder for others to do it, isn't it, if you're not in that kind of situation?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, and we've got certain privilege now, and age and
also when we were first doing things, it gets waves of fashion. I don't know. Yeah, you know this. Yeah. So when you were first writing those things, they were sort of not you know, we were like on the edge writing these things. It was not fashionable. There was moments where there was, you know, people weren't really looking at politics. Social practice wasn't embedded as it is now. And we did things like we went to the Empty Plinth in Trafalgar Square and wrote a function of public art to civilize, and we put that, and then we were like, you know, so we do stupid things like look out for who's coming and stuff like that.
Does this mean there was a moment when you were fashionable?
Yeah, well,
I don't remember that.
For a little bit. There was. It was about 2009, and at the same time.
What was it like?
I think we just travelled a bit more for a little while.
Yeah.
And there was more money sloshing around them, for arts, for people asking questions about what is public. So I think we were.
Yeah, and also that whole thing about public art and public sphere theory combining within that history was a bit, you know, a bit difficult. Yeah, but I think that's more. Now we're talking about multiplicities of publics and multiverse and things like that. We've got different languages. When we were trying to sort of say public sphere theory, and everyone would say, "Oh, Habermas is an old fart," and you know, of course, parts of Habermas is. You know, he is, but then we were trying to put that into the history of public art, which was even more old farty than, you know, a social theory of the public.
Yeah, very aesthetic.
So yeah. Anyway, I don't know if that's
but then our practice and our professional world is we've always had people around us who've also been from working class backgrounds trying to work it out as well. And think back to being at Wolverhampton University, and Dave Bainbridge was there from Art and Language, and he would always be talking about over a cup of tea about his class background and how Art and Language were dealing with those problematics, and how within the institution of Wolverhampton at the time, he was a strong voice for anybody from outside of the usual ways into education. So, you know, we keep organising, I suppose, don't we? Within the institutions
and
which
that's
we're
the
working.
history of wanting to be at Coventry because of our language and Terry Atkinson's trips, you know, talking about never talking about art, but talking about his caravanning trips and things like that. Yeah.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Show us that book.
Yeah, that sounds interesting, Gary. I wouldn't mind having a look at that. Right, I think because of the time, we've gone just a little bit over time, so I'm going to just stop the recording there shortly. Before I do, I just want to remind people that from the 6th to the 10th of June this year, we are going to be running the second Sirius Summer School, and that's going to be facilitated by Mia. And people are welcome to come if you keep an eye on Sirius social media. Or if you sign up to the mailing list, you'll get information about that, and we'd love to have as many people attend as possible, either part or for the full week. So we'll be sending some information about that. So I'd just like to thank very much Mia, Professor Christa-Maria Lerm Hayes, for the conversation today, and also to Mel Jordan and Andy Hewitt of Partisan Social Club for discussing their practice, and to everybody who attended here today. It's really nice to have the support and see friends and colleagues from all around Europe joining us. So thank you all very much, and stay in touch.